Outdoors panel. This is the most hotly anticipated part of the weekend for me, so I'm just going to introduce the panel for you. Holly should need no introduction, we've all seen her last night. Kate O'Brien from The Outward Bound. I just want to say something about Rehna. I feel like you are the living embodiment of that rising tide lifting all ships. Steve and I are working with you. It's just amazing.
Shout out Naima, where are you?
You're challenging, outspoken, wise, and an opportunity taker. And then last but not least, obviously, it's Jenny Dart. So Jenny's originally from Devon. She is an instructor here in North Wales, who now specialises in climbing and hill walking leadership in courses such as the Mountain Leader. Jenny's been a mentor at the Women's Trad Festival. She's a member of Ogwyn Valley Mountain Rescue Team. And she's a founder of the Women's Alpine Adventure Club, which some of you have been away with, I think. So wearing her other hat, Jenny is also a speech and language therapist in the NHS, who specialises in working with adults with learning disabilities. She combines these two specialisms to deliver the innovative Climbing for All courses. So thanks to Jenny for joining us today. Great, so I'm just going to start off. My first question, so these are sort of, these questions we've developed for the panel, and then there'll be a little bit of time at the end for questions from the floor as well. I hope that is informative and enjoyable. So this is to all of you, but I'm going to start with Kate. What does sexism look like in our world? And by our world, I mean this adventurous activities and outdoors sector.
Good question. So I thought it might be helpful to have a slide up behind us as we kind of discuss this session, and it's something that I guess my understanding and awareness and knowledge of has rapidly been developing over the last 3 to 5 years. And I think, I am really moving away from this idea that sexism is just this interpersonal thing of men doing shit things to women. And I think often that's how it's talked about, and often the examples that are talked about are that. And what I'm starting to understand a lot more is that it's a system of oppression that we're all healing from. And if we can view it as something that impacts us all, hurts us all, then it's something that we can think about that lives inside all of us. So I think the question was, how does sexism manifest itself? So I notice it in myself all the time. I was having a chat with a colleague yesterday about our new chief exec at Outward Bound, and I said, oh, well, when he comes along, and then I was like, I don't know who it's going to be. We're in the decision-making process. But within me is this idea that, well, chief exec of Outward Bound is going to be a man. Although I don't consciously believe that, and that is not in line with my values. And so, as women, we can be sexist within ourselves, and I think that's really important. The other thing I think that was important was that it can have a positive intent. So, because of sexist ideas that we might have internalised, whether we're male or female or non-binary, we can take actions to protect women, such as only helping women on with their rucksacks, or particularly smaller women. And so it can have a positive intent. It's not necessarily always just a negative thing. And then the third thing that I learned was that it's this whole system that happens within institutions, that happens in between our relationships with people, but it's also this internalized thing that impacts how we view and see each other. And when we see it in that bigger system sense, I think it helps us think more about the solutions. And I really liked what Guy was saying there about when we think about it as a system that we're all part of, and men being part of healing from that as well, rather than men being the current men being bad and they're the ones inflicting it all upon us. Men are such a big part of the solution to this as well.
Thanks, Kate. Holly, I'm just going to move it to you next.
I think moving up, linking to what Kate said, I think a lot of it's about belonging in these outdoor spaces and ideas of who's entitled more or less to belong. And I think in the mountains, in mountaineering and adventure, a lot of that has been built up through history, and some of it's been done quite actively. You say the French, when they didn't do so well in the war, they used Annapurna and their men being heroes out in Annapurna as a way of recovering. And it was built into these ideas of like what we see as strong masculinity. And you think that still feeds in to now today in like outdoor adventure and mountain training, who we see as like the real like belongers, the ones who are really in there. And I think that's like really built into like our idea of the great outdoors in the UK and who fits in there and who we imagine being in the great outdoors and who we imagine not being in the outdoors.
Go on, Rehna.
Yeah, I think for me, I look at it a bit of from a different angle. So I feel like we're always, in fact, the fact are that women are always fighting for everything. We're always fighting for equal pay. We're always fighting for our gender rights. We're always fighting for abortion rights. We're fighting for our education. Look at Pakistan, look at India, look at Nepal, the women that are living in the villages, and that is what is predestined for them. That's what society tells them that they've got to do. There's not even any looking to the great outdoors. And so for me, and then obviously you look at it from an ethnicity perspective, because for me they're all linked. So it's not just they're just women and sexism that they face in the great outdoors or their personal lives. It's all linked to, yeah, well, for me, again, I'm just talking about my own personal lived experiences, is that as a South Asian woman, it's like kind of like dictated to me already of what I'm going to be doing. So for me, it's sexism that's kind of like ingrained within the culture because, oh, South Asian women don't have leadership in, well, pretty much anything, never mind the outdoors. And then obviously you can also look at, we know that white women are more likely to go out and exercise, however much more likely than brown and black women. And then we want to look at why. It's not just because, oh, we don't want to go for a walk or we don't know that the great outdoors exists, because we see it. We see that, oh, look, when I'm talking about Ashton, we know that we've got Hartshead Pike, we've got Dove Stones right next to us. Why are we not going and experiencing these things? Well, a big part of that is the sexism from within the own culture that plays a massive role in that. So that's, yeah.
Jenny?
I think a lot of it is around gender assumptions. A lot of the time, I think that's sometimes what we butt up against a lot in the outdoor industry, in the adventurous activities industry, are these gender assumptions. And sometimes we have to work, or it feels like we have to work harder to get over those gender assumptions. And it can be quite tiring and quite wearing because sometimes I feel I have to prove myself a lot more than my male colleagues, and I don't know whether that's a social construct that's been put on me by society. I don't know if that's my own lack of confidence, probably a big part of that.
Which might be internalised
yes,
sexism.
exactly. But where has that come from? You know, because we're not born with that. So where has that come from? Has that been put upon us on purpose or not on purpose? I don't know. Lots of questions.
Yeah.
So what effect, leading on from that, does this sexist behaviour have on leaders, instructors and the groups that we work with, Rehna?
Oh, hard question. Well, I was thinking about this question and I thought it is really tough because, so for me, I'm a youth and community worker and an outdoor instructor and primarily like work with, you know, young women like I mentioned yesterday. And it does, and you think that it wouldn't, but even from like own community leaders, like, so I have to like manage like a group of 15 to 20 people on a weekly basis, and a lot of them are older Asian men, and it's so hard because Asian older men are usually the ones that are telling you what to do, not the other way around. So when you think of it like that, the effect that it has on our leaders, well, first of all, it's a lack of, you know, it can knock your confidence. You're thinking, oh, am I best suited in this role? Can I do this job? When Asian men, and again, I'm just generalising here, I'm just talking from my own personal experiences, are usually the one telling you what to do, not the other way around. You think, well, am I even skilled enough to do this job? Can I do this job? But then the other thing is not having an off day. So, you know, you'll have members of the community saying, oh, Rehna, well, what do you think about this? Or what can we do about this? And then meanwhile, you're thinking, oh, but someone has just told me that a woman should not be doing this job and you're not skilled enough to do it. So, but then when you flip that on the other side, when young women are seeing me in this role, I was kind of looking at it and I think it's not necessarily just a negative question, because if young women are looking at me and thinking, oh wow, look at Rehna, and Rehna can do X, Y and Z, Rehna's gone to Nepal for 3 weeks on her own, Rehna goes to Scotland every February for winter mountaineering, and so can we. And that's the positive effect that it can have on our groups. So they were just some initial thoughts that I was having.
That's that positive intent that Kate's
Yeah.
talking about, isn't it?
Yeah.
Great.
So,
So this,
Can I just say one quick
Yeah,
thing
go
on that? I think there's a really strong link between like what you were talking about there, like getting over your own internalized stuff to be like, no, this is important, I'm here, I reject that crap because it's important for the next generation. And so when we take charge of our own internal, when we understand it as a system rather than a personalised thing, and we're able to take charge of our own internal, you know, self-doubt, whatever it is, and step into our power, step into our leadership, we're doing a really like important thing for the next generation, I think, of people coming through.
so Kate, on that, if we're living in this era of increased inclusivity, why are there still fewer women in the outdoor sector? This is a good question from Katie Mercer. Are you in there, Katie? Yeah.
Ah, hi Katie. I was intrigued to know who you were.
Why are there fewer women in the outdoor sector?
Yeah, and that really got me thinking, and something I think and talk about quite a lot. I guess a few things I thought about in response to it was the wider picture of gender equality. So I suppose recognising that really early picture, the messages that girls are learning through society, and there's still some really current studies happening now in 2021, although we have although we have obviously gender equality laws, like how people understand gender. You know, kids as young as like 3, there's studies showing that parents treat the female children as if they're less capable than the male children. And so while we still have those messages in society, and like that other study about girls, fear of girls being in outdoor spaces, you know, while we still have those things embedded in children from such a young age, I think it always impacts then on people's sense of what's possible for their lives, career choices, those sorts of things. So I think that's a really big one. The other thing I think is related to what your challenge to Guy and John there. So organisations and qualification pathways, they're largely designed by men. So men set the syllabus, and although women are probably now having more input into it, men hold a huge amount of power, and we saw that there, you know, in your challenge. It's like, oh, well, it's a bit difficult. You know, if you wrote the qualification system, it would include a lot more emphasis on that. And, you know, imagine if Nan Shepherd wrote the ML syllabus, like what would that look like? And so we're still operating in a world where we're trying to fit this masculine idea of what it is to be in the outdoors, rather than inventing our own, well, you know, there are groups of people inventing their own spaces, you know, all these female communities. It's like, well, we don't want to fit into that. We're going to do it our own way over here, but that isn't yet within the formal structures. And it was really pleasing to hear, you know, the way Guy spoke about that, and the importance of building some of those things in. And like doing my level 3 mountain bike, I was so impressed at the level of importance that was put on the psychological, the leadership. Like I could really see and feel the change. I think that's going to take a much longer time to filter down. And then the final one I thought about was like the societal equality around like family and who's a primary caregiver. You know, we're always going to be the people who are pregnant and have children as women, but how that's understood in society around the role of men and women in raising children, it has a really key impact on women's careers. 3 quite big things, I think.
Facebook, social media has had quite a strong influence on people creating new groups, hasn't it? And new clubs and new ways of leading.
Absolutely, yeah. And hopefully that as time goes on, the things will influence each other, and we'll have a better kind of system that people are buying into.
So what we need now is some tools, I suppose, for the room to perhaps challenge some of this casual sexism that we come across day to day, particularly as a woman with a mountain training qualification. So this is my question to Polly. Have you encountered any sexist attitudes amongst clients and groups? And if so, how have you successfully challenged this?
So I've worked a lot with men who are in the criminal justice system, and with men taking them out climbing in the mountains, and dealing with clients who are sexist towards me is one I found easier to deal with, because you are in a powerful position when you are the leader, and do not forget that yourself. you're the one who's teaching them those skills and who's leading them through the mountains, who's keeping them safe in that climbing wall. So for me, it's holding on to internalizing like your own power and your own right to be there, taking that leadership position, and to enjoy educating people about who it's ignorance. If they don't think, if they're projecting sexism towards you, it's their own ignorance, and show them like how skilled and how awesome you are in your sport or your leadership role. Yeah.
Fragile masculinity, I'd say. Just not feeling comfortable in their own skin, so they project it onto other people and other women who are less powerful or can't stand up for themselves.
And I'm not gonna lie, like I've had situations where I haven't felt powerful enough, and if you're not gonna win that battle, then just like get yourself out there as soon as you can, or spend the day walking ahead of the group and see if they can keep up with you or whatever. And then like what if they leave at the back, you know, because you can't win all battles, like none of us can do that, and don't try and fight them if it's gonna take away some of your power from you.
Do you have those sexist attitudes from employers in the same way? Have you found that?
Yeah, and I think that's much more difficult for me because your employer is often more powerful than you. They hold the power, you're going to them for being told what to do and getting paid. I was thinking of personal examples, and like I've got one example of this, which was working for an awesome organisation to work for. It's very progressive, and I took on a leadership role for about a year. I've been there for a few years. Then I took on this role. A year after having the role, somebody else took the role, the other kind of same role as me. There was two of us in leading teams, and me and him were having a couple of beers and chatting, and it emerged that he was being paid nearly 2K more than me. And I was like, we were talking about it, and we had really good chats between us, and I was like, oh, that's kind of strange. And initially I was like, okay, well, I was a qualified teacher, which I don't know how I got through that qualification, but I do own that qualification. And I also am an MIA, and he was, apart from that, we had all the same, like paddling qualifications, mountain leadership qualifications. So I was like, you know what? It's because in my head, he's better than me at the job. And he managed to tell them that in that interview. And I didn't even think about it like this. And he was like, Polly, you know what this is? This is like gender bias, and men get paid 14% more than women on average for doing the same job. And you don't know it's that. Maybe it is because he was just more impressive than them at doing that role. But I internalized that, and he turned it on the institution. So we wrote an email together, and we also talked to other people about it outside of the organisation and sought some advice about this. And then we sent this email together to the HR department and said how it felt and how it looked and how it seemed and what did they think. And they backdated the pay for me and raised my pay straight away, which was awesome. But that experience left me questioning myself a lot. And I quite enjoy like challenging my employer about other people's issues, but when I'm doing it about my own, I did not enjoy that. I felt weak. So when it comes like to your employer, I would say don't take it personally. Yeah, if you have issues which you feel are about gender, don't take it personally. Like look for support outside of your organisation. And that might be like through mountain training, or like I know AMI's got a professional standards person. Maybe this mountain training must have a professional standards. You could go to them, like, and take your time over it, and then either make sure that you can challenge it. But if you're working for an employer that isn't making you feel powerful in your role, then you won't be able to like excel in your career. and be valued for who you are and part of who you are as a woman. And you should work for an employer that values the fact that you're a minority in our industry, and having you there is an absolute privilege for them.
That was Townsend saying her XX chromosome got her lots of.
Yeah.
It's quite a good example of a male ally, though, isn't it? So that ally, the risk would be that his pay got docked. But
Well, if he felt threatened.
yeah, if he was threatened. So the fact that he came forward and said, "Let's do it together," I think is a really great
What
example.
was really irritating about that situation is if you didn't pick up on it, they would have just left it. And then you think, yeah, fine, she's not bothered. Well, I was like, why don't we just think, well, we've employed this man to do the same role, well, why don't we just from the start?
Well, it's also, people are also so unaware of these things, and you can see there that really strong connection between the institutional and the internalised. And so the fact that it was an institutional, that decision had been made caused you to question, but then actually a man having that awareness and that privilege to be able to step in and do that when it was making you feel weak and horrible. So interesting, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've talked about male allies a tiny bit, Jenny. But how can women better support each other within this industry to overcome this casual sexist attitude?
I think, so for me, again, from my personal experience, I've really benefited from mentors in my outdoor career, and I'm sure lots of people have as well. So as Rachel said at the beginning, I grew up down in Devon in the southwest and worked in the outdoors down there. And I didn't really have any female role models, there weren't any, and I just kind of got on with that. And I met a wonderful woman called Sam Leary, lots of you might know Sam Leary, and that was the first time I'd actually seen a woman being really powerful and owning it, and it was a bit of a this is pretty cool. So I actively removed myself from the southwest, came to North Wales, and found this amazing community of women just getting on with it and just working and doing really well. And I think, so my experience comes from that. And having a role model, these kind of stepped role models almost. So having Sam Leary, Louis Peter, fantastic. But they're superwomen, yeah? They're amazing. I cannot directly compare myself to Livy or Sam. So for me, meeting people that were just a little bit ahead of me in my journey was really, really important. So for me, Iona, who's in the room, and Rachel, and a lady called Vicky Owen, and they were a bit ahead of me, and I could really identify myself with them. And I think that's really key, and building that community is super important. And I think we talked about, Facebook is great, and the Women in Mountain Training page, great, use that. And I'm very aware that I really benefited from geography as well, and I'm very aware that in North Wales we have this amazing outdoor community, which I did not see down in the southwest. I think it's building up now, but there's definitely geography challenges as well, and I guess the question is, how do we find that supportive female group to surround ourselves in if they're not kind of just next to us on the am I allowed to talk to you?
Actually, it's not a question, but more like a reiteration of what you're saying. One, I think it's really important for women to be supportive, because I think we can, and in other minority groups, we can often feel like we're in competition. And I definitely felt at times I like being the only woman in the situation and can feel threatened by other women. So I think it's actually important to have a community of support. And I also think what you said about having role models in multiple roles. I think again, women and other minority groups are often they're being put at beginner levels or they're put at superstar levels, and they have to be perfect to get the same recognition. And the same in music or other areas that actually there's lots of average or just above average and normal women doing those jobs, and that's really important for me to have those role models as well. So not a question, but just
I call that the queen bee syndrome, where you get a woman that loves being the only woman in the room. I've been guilty of that in the past. I don't know if anyone can see that themselves. And I remember thinking, actually, it's much more powerful for me to unite with these women rather than push them out of my circle. And since I stopped being a queen bee, I have been much more friends. But I noticed it in other people too. So if you think, I haven't seen that in somebody, you're totally right about it's it's natural. They say powerful women don't like other powerful women.
Yeah.
It's a thing in politics, isn't it? So
I-
we need to
I think for that question as well, just to add in, I think it's been really difficult, like for me, because for a long time, because like you said yesterday, like I've been working with Lindsay for like 8 years, and for a long time I was the only like South Asian female woman in an only men's space, or or in an only white space. So yesterday when we talked about, oh, it's nice to not feel like the minority, actually I did still feel like the minority. And that was okay because things are still slowly changing. But I think it is really difficult. But now that is changing, so like you're saying, not being the only queen bee. And actually I've had loads and loads of opportunities for being the only woman. Oh, who can we think of that takes young people out into the outdoors? Or let's ask Rehna to do this, or let's ask Rehna to do that. And actually that's built up my experience and expertise and skill level up quite a lot. So I think it's about using experiences to your advantage and brown skin girl, as you say, use it to your advantage.
Yeah, turn it on its head.
Yeah.
So that's quite interesting because yesterday, Kate, you talked about how we cannot be defined on gender alone. So this is like an intersectionality question. Could you define intersectionality before I carry on? I suppose it's a crossover, isn't it? So it's gender, but there's also.
Let's
Oh, she's got a slide.
Well, I don't have a slide, but I guess this one kind of, the one that I shared yesterday, it doesn't show the intersections, but I think, Rehna, you talked about it before, like you're from a South Asian community and you're female, so you experience the sexism and racism together, and being a South Asian woman, those two identities intersecting give you a unique identity that lots of us in this room wouldn't have had experience of.
But that might be disability, geography, social class, sexuality, any of those.
In the middle, Essentially identities that in the past have been marginalised, often through law. So when the Equality Act came in 2010, it was like the first time, although there were historic laws, that all of these characteristics were protected.
2010.
2010,
12 years ago. Everyone was alive then.
It was really recent. And I think now we're starting to understand a lot more about, it's not just like thinking about women isn't just being a woman, it's like how all of these different categories affect your experience of being a woman as well.
Yeah, so the question is, in terms of this intersectionality, not all female identities are better represented in the industry than previously, and there's still often a lack of diversity amongst leaders and participants. So how do we collectively ensure opportunities for all women continue to develop?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. The first time we ran the women's leadership course, it was 8 white women, relatively privileged backgrounds, a little bit of difference, but not loads. The second time we ran it, we were definitely a lot more conscious in terms of like where we were advertising, so who would actually see the message that it was available. I think one thing personally, on a personal level, I think that's really helped me understand more, and as a result of that understanding, do things differently, is like listening to different people's stories, and that's become a lot easier in the world that we live in now, and with the focus that like national governing bodies have. There's like brilliant webinar series, like you're part of the AMI, they ran a fantastic series with Anila McKenna, like listening to Anila and some of her experiences, working alongside Rehna, like listening to some of your podcasts. The film that came out by Patagonia that followed Laura Sapur and Non-Binary Climate, they them, like watching that, absolutely brilliant film. So really consciously engaging with media of a range of different people's identities. I think then like makes you question, like, oh, I've never thought that before because I've not lived it. So consciously raising your opening your eyes to blind spots, reading as well, different books. And again, there's so much. Like we're living in a world at the moment where like diversity and understanding lived experience is really, really current. So there's loads of content out there. The other thing is data. So deciding what to measure often drives decisions. So like we were looking at the mountain training stats yesterday, and it was like, oh, it's women, but we haven't looked at women and ethnicity or women and disability. And so once you start measuring data, that then is like, oh, actually there's a big disparity here, and that can drive other changes in decisions. I think that's the main one. ones that
Go on,
I've got.
Jenny.
I was just going to say, one of the things that Anila talks about is who's around the table making these decisions,
Yeah.
which I've thought a lot about, and I think who is sitting around that table at mountain training? Do we have good representation from non-standard, non-historically standard groups? Because the best kind of win in the world, like I am a white middle class woman from a very rural background, and I don't know all the things that are important to all the people. So how are we actively encouraging those people to sit around our table?
And in a paid capacity.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But then, yeah, also to touch upon that is that, like, I might be like a brown South Asian woman, but I'm not the voice of all EDIs,
Yes.
and I don't stand for everyone.
Yeah.
So I make that really clear right at the start. I can talk on my opinion, and I'm willing to learn and go on EDI training myself. I'm going to speak to other groups, I'm going to speak to community groups, and etc. etc. So, but when you're talking about who is at the table, it's such a relevant question, because genuinely, in my experience, it's just been white, middle class, old men, in the nicest way possible. And I mean that with all the respect. And I think it's changing a little bit, and since BLM, and that was a massive catalyst for all these different groups and social media. Everyone's like, wow, look at these groups, and the LGBTQIA plus water climbing groups out there, and the walking groups, and Wanderers of Colour, and all these amazing groups that have started. And what we just need is sustainability, because and that's going to happen when they're invited to the table to make the change, because the change just can't, like Guy was saying, it's all well and good Guy saying it, but everyone needs to be on the same table, on the same level playing field, on the same level, and wanting to change.
That must be quite interesting for you, because you're often probably asked as the voice of EDI.
At the EDI table.
Yeah, at the EDI.
Yeah.
We'll talk about
But
that.
like you say, it's like us to think about every type of diversity.
And I don't have the answer for every type of diversity. I'm willing to learn about every type of diversity, and working in the different groups in Ashton, that has given me a really wide experience. And I would badge on about having a lived experience, but like I say, I'm not the voice of all EDI.
And I think that's a really strong reason why we really need to engage men in their journey of understanding all of this. So, because I mean, the reality now is that there are more men in positions of power, and if we can speak about this in a way that engages men and gets men thinking, like not feeling threatened or, put down. And I know it's sensitive because some people are like, oh, well, we don't want to pander. Like they're the one that made it this way. But my personal view is that no change happens when people feel threatened or put down, and that actually a lot of men are hurting as a result of gender inequality as well. And when men understand this topic, like the way Guy's obviously got a really strong understanding of the way he spoke about that there, and the influence he's now able to have through his role in mountain training is brilliant. And I hear a lot from men, like, I'm not sure I can be, like we did diversity champions, and quite a few men have said to me, I can't either, can I be one? Or, oh well, I can't join that, I'm a white middle class man.
Yeah.
They thought they weren't allowed to stay, that's why they left, and then I ran after them and said, no, please come and stay.
Yeah. No.
Yeah.
Oh, you are really? Hello! Good, I'm really glad you're here. Yeah, and so many men in Outer Bounds have said that they don't think it's for them, or like white male pale stale, that is an absolutely shocking term, I think. Like, it's not okay to blame men who've perhaps had no role in the oppression of women. Some men do, and some men are actively behaving in that way, but lots aren't, and lots are really open to learning, and that's such an important part of change.
That actually moves. Oh, go on.
Well, I was just thinking, like, if you run, like, I know lots of women in the room run their own climbing or mountaineering business or hill walking, like they run their own business, and I think often we want to open the door to women who can't like pay for courses, or if it's not for like an ethnicity reason, it's for other barriers that stop women engaging, then we want to do that and open the door, but it's hard to do because it's quite easy to say, hey, if you've got money, you want to come on a course, you already like climbing, come. But I feel like it's something we could work together better to create ways of like opening other doors and involving other people in the work that we do with our private businesses as well.
You talked about being the Robin Hood of guiding, Colin.
So what I do is like, that's my absolute dream, and what I do is I say to like rich clients I started working with in the Alps, hey, you want to give some money to people who can't do this, and one client gave me 2K, and I told them like next September I'm going to see how much money I have, and then try and work with, I don't know, someone else in the room who is doing that kind of work. Or last year I worked with Etta, who works for Snowdonia National Park, and we work with Women's Aid in Bangor to do like women's walking days, and we got paid for our days out because it's our skill, but we kind of organised it and made it happen, and it was so much fun. So there is ways that are creative, and it makes you work like a lot more fulfilling as well, I think.
Yeah.
That's quite a good point, because we are all here to make money, well, most of us. I certainly say jackets don't pay the mortgage, I'm here to make money. So it's quite a good way of using your skill and your privilege to make some money out of some rich people and take some of their money and give it to people that need it. Great. We can talk about that forever, I think. Esther's made a good point about that in the past. But I'm going to go back to Kate's talk about, you were talking about men, and specifically about allies. So this is for you, first of all, Jenny, is about allies, and how they can better support female colleagues. So we've got 3 in the room, but, you know, how can people go and train their allies to help them?
Really interesting. I think, first of all, lots of men are really curious about how to support women, I think, and I think that's a really good thing and should be encouraged. And I think want to take direction and want to be steered, is that the right word? Yeah, steered in the right direction, whatever that is. And I think, you know, using those conversations and taking those opportunities to be like, actually, I feel like this, or when you say that, that makes me feel, is quite good. My mountain rescue team is quite a male-led team, and they were quite surprised by this slender female who wanted to join the team, and it has been a battle. But what I found is there have been men in the team who actively encourage you into leadership positions, and I think those men who can see something in you really foster that, and I think that's brilliant. And I think that by encouraging that and by recognising that as well is great. So I think some men that I've come across are threatened. They don't like it. It's historically not what they're used to. I introduced some EDI training and Anila into my mountain rescue team, which Anila likes to say she's a disruptor. She definitely did some disrupting. But watching how Anila managed these very difficult conversations with men who didn't understand, it's not of their age, you know, like it's not something they've experienced as they've been growing up. And it's how we change those kind of those people into supporters, I think, and by seeing other men supporting me and other women in our mountain rescue team, it kind of sets a good precedent, it sets a good example, and I think having more men joining into that is a real driver for change. I think sometimes some people, men or women, don't see the importance of it. They just don't see it, and I'm kind of of the impression now that that's fine. Like, you know, if they can't see it, if that's not important in their lives, fine. Because they're not blocking what other people want to do. I think everyone's entitled to their own opinion, but by actively kind of drawing out those male allies and making that an example, I think that's really important as well.
It takes a lot of courage to be the first ally, doesn't it? The first one to speak out.
Yeah.
You talked about those powerful allies in the team who spoke out, and now more have got behind them.
And I think that's just by chance. So there's a wonderful chap called Tim Harrop who is in our team, and he wears pink shorts and a pink helmet, and he loves it, and he likes being a little bit different. So I think sometimes it's just finding that one little catalyst of change can really be a big difference. really fortunate. And when there isn't that, that can be quite challenging, and that's when it gets quite difficult. And sometimes you have to own your power, I think, and just kind of keep showing up, keep doing it until you've proven to people that you do belong to be there as much as them, and then they'll get on your side, I think, a lot of the time.
Kate, did you have something to add to that? Or?
I think there's something important about our own bias towards men and not assuming that because we might have all had it and like maybe negative experiences with men and that interpersonal dynamic, that can lead to a kind of more widespread assumption that men aren't going to care about gender equality, they're definitely not going to get it, and that stops us from talking about it. And I've definitely had like so many experiences since doing this role where I've noticed that assumption in myself, and I've noticed that drives disconnection rather than connection. And so I've started trying to like have in my mind like men are open to gender equality, go in with that belief to every conversation. Also, I can see Chris at the back, and I know Chris has done brilliant work through the IOL and did a fantastic series, I think it was called Better Together, some really good articles and research through the IOL. So if you're interested in stuff around male allies, like Chris is a super resource to chat with as well.
I was just wondering about the how, like, so how do we start these? What is the way that you start these conversations, either with allies or challenging people in your groups or peers, etc., without it being an aggressive thing, without having to laugh it off as banter? How do we have those? Do you have any techniques or phrases, good phrases, to challenge those languages, to challenge those opinions that are just being thrown away?
And this isn't going to directly answer the question, but I suppose what immediately comes to my mind is like I would censor myself. So when I first started doing this job, a male colleague actually said to me, "Be careful what you put your name to," and I think that kind of stayed with me. That made me like be like, should I do this? Oh, I don't know. Is this going to be really bad for my career? And so that made me like maybe not talk so much. And I noticed, if I was talking to women, I would get really enthusiastic about my job. If I was talking to a man, particularly a man who I perceived to be really technically competent, I would be like, oh, I'm a manager in the outbound. You know, I wouldn't say what I did. And so what I got a lot better at doing was being a lot more authentic and consciously, making myself have the conversation. Like, oh, I'm running a women's leadership course, and just being really open and expecting to get a positive response, rather than expecting to be like, oh, they're going to shoot me down, they're going to think what I'm doing is rubbish, they're going to think that's not equal to being an MIC or, you know, whatever that is. And then the other part of your question was about like, how do you challenge if there's like an interaction that's not, that's maybe implying gender inequality. And I think I've tried to be curious and like, oh, are you aware that what you said maybe implies this? Like, I'm sure you didn't mean that, but I just wanted to check in, is that something you were aware of, rather than like getting really defensive, and that has opened up the conversation a bit more.
I was just going to add, don't be afraid to have the conversations, even though it might put you, and actually it takes a lot of energy, and it's quite draining to always be the one to challenge. Yeah, exactly. But also take it in your stride, and if something doesn't sit right with you and you think it's wrong, just address it. And just be polite and just say, oh, can I just make a point on that? Or can we please stop making this comment now? Which I just did last week.
And I think like, because like, you know, there's this like archetype of this like woman who's like, it's not fair for me, and I felt like that in these conversations where I'm trying to explain something and I'm in this weaker position and people aren't listening, and I'm like, but you don't get it, and it's like this, and like, I feel so disempowered right now. So timing doesn't have to be you, like, do it in a way that you feel cool about, like send them a link to a video that goes, see what I mean now? Or like, and when you can, like when the time is right, like just tell them how it makes you feel, because no one can take that away from you. And if they're not ready to accept like how they're making you feel, then they're not ready.
I often say like, what do you mean by that? Like saying kind of, you know, and then they go, so I use that quite a lot. I'm like, what do you mean when you say that? Why is that applicable now? Like, and then they kind of go,
I'm going to take one question from this, a lady in the hat.
I guess it's not so much a question, it's just like a strategy that I've started using. I never use the word privilege with men because that immediately makes certain individuals prickly or defensive. And so there's the like considering how burdened we are. In our different intersected positions, some of us are more burdened than others. And like that weight makes it harder to kind of progress or to access. And so it's like a consideration of like societal, cultural, gender burdens and not privilege. And then the phrase, I'm not calling you out, I'm calling you in. I'm calling you into a new perspective, I'm calling you into a new experience. It's all, yeah, it's that like phrasing and just being not perceived as aggressive.
Nice. Often these conversations only happen in women's spaces as well, so I'm saying inviting men in to consciously have this conversation. Like, I don't know, Guy, John, maybe you're learning things that you might not often hear talked about in this way or in this much depth. And often it can be, that can be really informative, and that's something we did on the women's programme as well. We had a speaker evening where we talked about gender inequality and the gendered landscape, and there were male mentors there, and for both the women on the course and the men involved, it was one of the most powerful things, I think, that are certainly a lot of people fed back. It was one of the most powerful things.
So that's quite an interesting point about the change in the industry over the last few years. So my question starts with Polly, is about how this has changed for women during your career. So you said you've been a lifelong outdoor instructor. Have you seen a change in this sexism?
So I remember when I was like in my early 20s and I felt disempowered quite regularly at work, and it would be in the like more hidden spaces, like you're driving somewhere in a minibus and somebody just disempowers you, or like maybe it's just some like odd sexualized remark or something that suggests you might not be very good at something. But it wouldn't happen in an open arena where there were like more older, more powerful, more respected people. But it would sometimes happen in like all male staff rooms where it's like a little bit of a joke about like women or whatever and stuff. And I just like laughed along because I wanted to have friends, not be lonely at work, and I was fully aware that their behaviour was disgusting and it didn't make me want to be like friends with them, but there was bits of them that I liked. So we took those bits and I learned like finding skills or whatever, work skills from them. And as I've got older, that doesn't happen to me because either I work in outdoor centres where I have a bit of choice, probably where I work, and I work in outdoor centres either where that behaviour doesn't happen or where it doesn't happen to me. But I know it still happens, and I'm not sure, like, I think the big progressions that have happened across my career is more events like this, and there's other ones that are happening just at the moment where it's like big female gatherings together of sharing like belonging and connection and what you're up to, your projects, and even if it's like still feels like the institutions are more, somehow they feel more like male to me still, and maybe that's just my perception. It feels like there's other institutions you can take belonging and strength from that are occurring like now, like even just in the past year or so. It feels really good for me around that. Yeah.
And do you think being part of that space informs then how you show up in mixed gender environments or in response to these situations?
Yeah.
Jenny, you were a mentor at the Women's Trad Fest, but you were a leader before, were you? So can you give everyone a little quick overview of that event? Because that's a change in the last few years, isn't it? Events like that.
So from Trad Fest, kind of there are learners who are usually new to crag climbing, new to outdoor climbing, and then there's a qualified RCI leader, and then my role or our role as mentors is to kind of look after those little RCI kind of groups, and it's great because that is that stepwise mentoring again, I think, and so the learners, you know, have a lovely time outdoors and realise that there aren't red holes everywhere and real rock is much better. Even though it's for it. And then the RCIs kind of, because I think as outdoor instructors, we work a lot in isolation, yeah? Like we unless we work in outdoor centres or do joined up work, which doesn't happen that much, we work a lot in isolation. So it's really nice to join together, share ideas. And as a mentor, I learn a lot from my RCIs, and hopefully I give them a little bit of kind of career progression or some ideas of how to teach climbing maybe a different way. And I think that event has been super cool. Through my Women's Alpine Venture Club, we ran a meet in the Dolomites, and two of the girls who came on that as like independent climbers, they met 5 years ago at the Women's Trad Fest as learners, and had kept climbing together ever since, and then came to the Dolomites as independent alpine climbers and went and did an alpine big rock multi-pitch by themselves. And I just thought, I got very emotional. I sent Ellie a very emotional message. But it was just super cool to see kind of girls that met at the Women's Trad Fest, new to outdoor climbing, then coming up and doing like a big alpine multi-pitch. And obviously you don't have to go that way, you can always stay on the grit if you really want. But, yeah.
It's quite a good, that, since then we've had other festivals, haven't we? So we've got the Irish Women's Rock Festival, there's some people in the room.
Yeah,
There's Irish, yeah. And you were saying that there's only 5 qualified female MCIs in Ireland, is that right? 4. So then they got to meet another few who've come over from.
Well, there's actually one that worked at the festival, because the other 3 came.
Yeah, okay. So you've got such a small pool of people to inspire that next generation, haven't you?
Yeah.
So hopefully this is the start for you of that festival to enable climbers to meet people who are that next stepping stone up. I think that's what's.
If they want to, like,
Yeah.
you don't have to, like, and that's what's really cool about climbing in the outdoors is that you can do whatever you want, and I think that's awesome.
Yeah, that's been a bit of a powerful change, hasn't it? Certainly in my career, the last 15 years, seeing these events. So that's all on the individual. All these things are like put on your heads, which I know is kind of what you're here for. But my last question before I ask the floor is, how do influential organisations like Mountain Training, the BMC, Duke of Edinburgh, better support the development of female leaders in our industry? Jenny.
Oh, yes. Well, I think it's got much better, hasn't it? I think there are, the Women in Mountain Training movement, that Facebook page. I remember when that started, and I was like, oh, this is super cool. Like the other networking opportunities, and I think really that can be used to great advantage by meeting other women. And some of the best things that have come out of that, I think, are women who are, maybe working towards their ML assessment, who live around Bristol or something and want to go out night nabbing together, and using it in that way is great. I'm disappointed that Mountain Training Cymru doesn't have the same kind of gender initiative strategy plan as England, and I don't really understand why that's a thing, but there we are. And I think the BMC, the gender steering group, which Cress in the back is always been part of, the equality steering group, they're tackling big issues as well. So it is in the narrative now. I think the challenge is getting that onto the street, into the outdoors. So really grassroots level stuff like DAV, the Prince's Trust, they've all been there working for such a long time. And I think it's how do we bring all of those experiences together. I work a lot in DAV, which I'm sure lots of people in this room do, and I think it's a really great way of showing that females can be leaders as well, because I don't know about everyone else in the room, but quite often I'm employed as a female leader because it's male teachers that do the job, yeah? And even if there is a female, they're not taking the lead in kind of like technical stuff. They're the ones that are doing like, oh, this minibus needs to be here then, or doing stuff in the kitchen. So I think it's really good to get young girls as teenagers seeing that females can be leaders and taking control, making these big decisions. One of the things that definitely talked about with Tanya Notes with the guide that Polly talked to was about getting girls into the guiding scheme. Like you kind of have to start as a teenager, like, you know, because a lot of the time to get women in earlier, we need to be addressing people girls at teenage, early 20s to say, hey, this is an option, like this is something you can do. So I think DME and other youth organisations are really key in showing that this is a valid female career option. It's not just for men, if you want to do it. Yeah.
Polly, your experience must be relatively different at the upper technical end of the awards.
Well, I was just gonna like link into what you were saying about like, I think, was it John earlier who said like a lot of these, a lot of the time you attend a course which is just a straight course and it is a male only event, and things like the Young Alchemist group or the John Conville courses, a lot of those are like almost male like only events. There was a couple of girls that showed up a few times, but it was very male. And so something I'm trying to do is like suggest that the John Conville course runs 2 courses which are female only, so girls can hook up, and make sure that the Young Alchemist group has equal representation of women and like save 5 of those spaces for young women. I feel that Plas Brenin should be taking more of an active role in delivering courses for groups that aren't already represented. And like, I don't know all of the finances and stuff, but it makes sense to me that courses run here would be done for groups which have like more encouragement to come along because the door doesn't seem wide open to them. And because it's seen as it's like these Plas Brenin is supposed to be like the elite representation of mounted training, and that is about technical skills, but it is also about soft skills and having like leaders from different backgrounds that can then reach out and work with young people or adults from different backgrounds.
Not gonna really find them here though.
No, in North Wales.
Yeah.
Yeah, but recruiting and
That's
training,
like
like
like somewhere like Plas Brenin, where like someone from Manchester, like me, would not normally come to Plas Brenin for an outdoor training qualification or a course. I'd go somewhere in Peak District, which I didn't even know existed until I was 20. You know what I mean? So it's so hard because it's like, well, if people are not in the area, how do you recruit them? Already you've got a certain demographic that are going to access Plas Brenin. The courses are like that the condensed, what's it called, that course where you can come in for like 4 months, a fast track outdoor instructor training thing. Like, who the hell's got 10 grand or however much it is to come in and fast track?
That's like what I feel like the National Training Centre should be doing is like funding spaces, and maybe I'm just a bit of a dreamer.
No,
definitely, but or having outreach workers that go out and work with youth centres and people who are nearly ready for their ML and bring them here and be like, this is you, get these skills and take them home.
Yeah, like in my personal experience, I'm like, it took me 10 years and I'm just about here. Like, it's not easy. When you have so many different barriers that you've got to overcome to just about go and get your frigging climbing wall award or your ML training or your RCI training, it's not easy. And that's why I like when you were saying getting people in positions that might not necessarily even be into the outdoors, but they have a better EDI knowledge. Or a trustee for Plas Brenin, for example, that doesn't even have anything to do with the outdoors, but they have a whole different perspective on life that they can bring to the wider pool team. Do you know what I mean? Oh.
I think I was having a really interesting conversation with Helen last night. I don't know if she's in the room, but we were talking about the background of the chief executive, and I don't know if she's in the room either. But I was really fascinated to learn that the recent chief executive appointment here is somebody who doesn't have an MIC, who doesn't have that background. And so I think that that change is really important, isn't it? And ties in with what Guy was saying about that narrow funnel in which we give people respect or put them on a pedestal and assume that because they have this one ticket they must be wonderful at everything, which we all know is not true, and breaking that down.
Yeah.
Really important.
We have got a little bit of time for a couple more questions. Oh my. Lady in the blue top. Yeah.
Question for Rehna. In terms of, you've talked a lot about the work that you do with disadvantaged young people from various backgrounds. How do you persuade families? I work in central Milton Keynes, which is fairly deprived, and we've got lots and lots of varied backgrounds. But the biggest barrier we face is persuading their families to let them get involved. How do you deal with that?
Well, that's like top of our priority list, to be honest. You can't work with young people if you don't work with their families. You can't work with young people. You can't get young people to understand the importance of the outdoors if their parents don't know about the importance of the outdoors. It's as simple as that. Like I said yesterday, when I told my dad about a full-time job with Lindley, he said, "Are you going to make more money?" Because for him, that was what his priority was. And when I told him, then his chest inflated and he was like, "Wow, I'm so proud of you, go get it, girl." Do you know what I mean? So, number one priority for us is working families. If you don't have them on board, you're never going to be able to get their children on board. And when I say children, I still mean 18 plus. Like I said yesterday, the whole culture is so different. You might have an 18-year-old woman who legally, in the eyes of the law, is an adult and she can make her own decisions, but she's still living with her parents until she's married and has her own family. She doesn't actually have, generalising, the autonomy to make her own decisions. So, like we have amazing weekends where we take families from Ashton to our outdoor centre in the Holliford Centre in Castleton, and it's an amazing family residential. I think every centre should do that, and it's families that have never been to the Peak District, they've never been to a national park, they've never been on holiday with their families, and it's just amazing. You've got grannies having their brews while watching their grandchildren on the high ropes, and it's just the best thing. But my number one advice is you have to get families on board. So get people from community leaders, mosques, centres, whatever you've got, get them on board who then can speak to families, because in the nicest way possible, when like a white person goes into like whatever group that might be, into that, there's just no relatability there. So I hope that answers.
You talk a lot about that, Brenin, in the past, about how you are the link into that community, because you're from that community, don't you?
Mm.
So it's how to get you
Out and stop being just the only.
The only person.
Yeah.
Well, that was so important for us, like working together on the young leaders, wasn't it? That family perspective.
Yeah.
But without we found it coming to Ashton and being like, "Hey, anyone wants to do a young leaders program?" No one would just signed up, wouldn't they? So that collaboration and partnership and building understanding
Yeah, absolutely.
to open up opportunities.
Go, yeah.
Thanks. One thing that I observed which was really useful, and then something to ask the panel. I'm going to pick on Lucy again. The first thing she said on our ML was, "I'm a typical ML," when she introduced herself to the group. And I thought that was really powerful because it just silenced any question about who's the leader here. I'd like to pick up with something Polly said about 20 years ago when we're in that room and we laugh and we go along with people. That makes it look like we're okay with that behaviour. And there's a need to unpick that, and that's quite challenging to get people to question about how that sort of groupthink is sort of happened in the past, and untangling that. So I'd be interested to hear what people thought about that.
We did a bit of work on that within OB, and silence is complicity was the kind of sentence that was the takeaway from that, and moving from as I think it's similar with the anti-racist work, isn't it? You can't just not be racist, you have to be actively anti-racist in order to make a difference. And so opening up conversations about understanding what your role is as a bystander, and being an upstander in those situations rather than just letting them go, and recognising your role in doing that, I think can be quite powerful, rather than just be like, oh, it's someone else's responsibility.
But you've got to pick your battles as well, because I don't think I would have been able to progress and then move forward with my career so much if I'd been fighting every single one of those battles. And you maybe just Well,
I think that's where allies is really important, isn't it? And that we think about groups other than our own. So like you've had some like female battles where you don't want to stand up for yourself, but perhaps you notice oppression happening to other groups of people, where you're then able to interrupt that and acknowledge it, and it's not your fight for something that's hurting you. It's like, how can we be allies for each other?
I feel like I've ignored people at the back, so yes, the lady with the black top. Yes.
So I suppose I don't know if my question's been touched on, but I've worked in the outdoors as an outdoor instructor for almost 20 years, and the last role that I did in the outdoors was as a ranger in the Moor Mountains. When we were hired, there hadn't been any rangers before, and I was the only woman hired at the time, so it was the first one. And I had a few comments afterwards, some of them jokey and some of them not so much, that I only got the job because I was a woman. I've since moved into aviation, where the ratios I think are similar to mine, guys. Less than 4% of women worldwide are pilots, and the chance of you having 2 pilots on your flight is less than 0.5%. And in that role, I've also had more comments saying, well, you only got that job because you're a woman, because there's been a bit of a push to get more women into the job. And I'm just wondering from all of you, like, is there ever a point at which you can benefit? Like, because it's a bit conflicting, you know, because on one hand, you're sort of using sexism and the response to sexism to get ahead, but then you're also getting criticised for it. So I'm just wondering, is there ever a point where you can sort of justify positive discrimination to sort of help you? I mean, I've seen my test scores, so I know that I didn't get the job just because I'm a woman. And just to clarify, that has come from outside the industry, not aviation is actually very good at fighting sexism. We do a lot of training because sexism can ultimately kill a lot of people in the cockpit if you do something because you're being sexist. So it's actually dealt with very well in that industry. But I'm just wondering, from your perspective, have any of you ever had those comments where you said, you know, you've only got this job because you're a woman? And is it okay to take advantage of that positive discrimination if it is positive discrimination, or I mean, how do you sort of deal with that conflict, I guess is what I'm asking.
I believe in positive discrimination anyway. Like, I think even if I'm not as good as the guys, then I'm gonna be there, because then maybe the women that follow in my footsteps, there'll be more of them because they have some role models, and then it will become less of an issue in the future. But I get that kind of comment all the time, and I just think, like, piss off.
Like Facebook groups, it's like, right, that's the biggest thing, isn't it, on Facebook groups? Every posting of a job advert, oh, but you're looking for a female leader. Oh, why would I be a female leader?
Yeah, there's actually been quite a lot of backlash from the male pilot community, because they're saying now they can't get jobs. Because they're all good women, but yet still 4% of them go.
I think take it in your stride, because like I said before, I will openly say I know I've had loads of opportunities because I am this woman, and just take it, because it's only going to develop your skills professionally and personally. I probably wouldn't. I'm in this position now I am today because of a man, right? And I know that Adnan, my youth worker, he was a man. And I'm saying this yesterday, the only positive for me, my first outdoor female role model was Kate, and that was only from like 5 years ago when we started working together. But Ollie, take it, and so what? But like you said, so what? If they only give me the job because I'm a woman, then do you know what? Good on them, actually.
But also, we are always so much more than just that one tiny little identity box.
Yeah.
And you might be sat here because somebody recognises that representation is really important, which is a really good thing. But you're also sat here because you're an amazing speaker, you're really passionate, you've got so many skills to offer. And so I think, like, I don't know, it's just deflection. When people say, oh, you only got it because you're a woman, it's just a deflection from the really important issues, and it's a diversion tactic to distract us and actually, so I think if you're a woman in that situation, experiencing that, it's reassuring yourself about all the skills and all the qualities and all the reasons why you are the person for the job. And I guess if you're unsure of that and you feel like you've been put in a position purely on the basis of your gender, then I would be speaking to whoever of my colleagues about that, and if, you know, if I didn't feel like I was genuinely the right person, then that's definitely a conversation to have, because, you know, that's not okay. But
yeah,
what
or like if they want you there because they want more women represented and you don't feel you can meet that job, then you need to ask for more support because you're doing them a favour.
Yeah, exactly. But also in questioning how we define what good is. Like I think you said there, you know, if the man was better than you or something, and you were making the point earlier about, well, what do we value in a good leader? And I think that's what's so important about how it ties in with the qualifications pathway and your challenge to Guy and John earlier. Why are we not valuing interpersonal skills and self-reflection as part of leadership and understanding yourself more? And when we don't value those things so highly, when we look at who's the most competent, we'll technical skills, great. And if those things aren't valued in the qualification pathway, we continue to view it through that lens. And so, we just have to get really clear about what is it that's important.
We're not just women out.
No.
There's so much more to it.
We can talk about this all day. So sorry that is, we're going to run out of time. So it's a really good point to end on it. Remember that when someone says you just got there as a woman, you say no, it's because I'm really good. Thank you very much to our panel, Jenny, Rehna, Kate and Polly. To talk about it. It's nearly break time. Anyone's crossing their legs, but we're going to do a whole conference group photo. So we're going to do it on the lawn with Snowdon in the background. That's the big mountain over there. I'm going to go at the front, and you're just going to follow me to where we're going. So you don't stop. Don't go to the toilet. Just follow me.